Or I can just be a
I can do
disembodied
that.
voice. Rip.
Oh god.
How are you?
All right. I'm not too bad. It's early for me to have all of
Think.
this going.
Yeah.
Yeah, to have to use my brain before like 5 p.m. is a bit early, I guess. Not like bad, but I'm gonna keep drinking my coffee that I've had for a little bit. Um, but yeah, it looks like you had some fun playing Hollow Knight.
I was doing okay. I feel like that last boss fight was just maybe not my skill set.
You'll get there. I believe you'll get there.
Yeah.
All right. So do we just want to jump into it? What's
Yes, I'm
the
trying
plan?
to make a notepad thing right now and
Oh,
failing. You want to like introduce yourself maybe a little bit for my viewers who don't
yeah.
know you?
No worries. All right. Hi, Jorbs viewers. My name's Kate. I have a degree in molecular genetics and biotechnology, and I then did honors in cardiovascular disease. So basically, what that means is I basically studied a lot of biomedical science. And part of my honors, I did a animal clinical trial, which is really interesting. So I just have a lot of background knowledge about specifically biomedical science. Obviously, a lot of these things that we're going to talk about today are going to apply to lots of fields of science. It's something that's applicable to like anything you want to talk about. It doesn't matter if it's like maths, physics, chemistry. These are sort of like guidelines of science that are important if you want to convince people or, you know, either convince people that your research is good and important or just communicate the fact it exists, right? It's pretty important for that. Um, we all good for me to start ranting?
Yes, we're talking about intro. Science communication is important. And our topics are then going to be climate change, and then climated change? Nope. Climate change, GMOs slash CRISPR. Is that all
Yeah.
caps? It's an acronym, right?
Yeah, it's an acronym.
And then
CRISPR and
Corona.
then, yep, all COVID.
Sweet.
There's a new name for it this morning, which is great. Love that.
For CRISPR or
Um,
for coronavirus?
for coronavirus, yeah.
All
I'm
right.
just like,
We're not
great.
allowed to talk about that yet. We have to wait.
Yeah, we'll get to the end. Otherwise, I think that's all we'll talk about the entire time.
Agree?
Um, so now I'm going to give you this is probably like the less exciting part of the rant, but a good explanation of just like why science communication is important, like what it actually is, what goes into science communication. Why should you care as someone who reads things on the internet? Um, why should you care about how science is presented on the internet, right? And someone who's a science communicator is not necessarily someone who has, um, you know, studied science communication specifically. Like you can study science communication now, but it's not necessarily something that you do a lot of. Like in my degree, we had maybe two half-an-hour lessons on why it's important. I really think there should be more of that, significantly more in like any sort of STEM topic because I mean, like the number one thing is like doesn't matter what science you're in, right? If you can't tell someone what your research is or what you found and you can't explain that to the general public, it might as well not exist, right? Like if I can't take something that's super complicated, like I understand it because I've done years of background knowledge, right? But if you can't translate that for someone who doesn't have that background knowledge, it's really hard to educate the general public, right? Like how are you going to tell people what you're doing? It's really it's quite difficult there. Um,
And
so
it's important to educate the general public. Why? Not saying it's
well,
not, but
oh, like
what are the pros?
I mean, like you want to
Funding.
be educated, right? So the main thing that we struggle a lot with, especially with science, is fear, right? Fear of the unknown. That's one of the biggest problems that we'll come across in all of the things we talk about is that when we don't know what something is or we don't know how it works, it's scary, right? And the more we know about something, the more we can be comfortable, right, with something. Um, the more we can understand it, the more people are more open to it, right? And then we can learn more. And then life progresses. Oh God, my background. I might be better off with green.
All right, I'll just give you
um,
green. That's fine.
that's fine. Um, it's like we can't further knowledge if you don't know it, right? And if we want to educate everyone because that's how we move as a society, right? You can't if you leave people behind and you don't teach people things, people don't learn and they stay in a very sort of closed off mindset, right? And obviously, like like it's not like the purpose of our existence as much as I'd love to say science is the whole reason we exist. No, but the further of knowledge is definitely something that is beneficial to us, like everyone, right?
Do you
Um,
think that generally is like science communication something that is a separate field from research? So like somebody's doing research and then somebody else is like contracting with them to be like, oh, this is how we need to communicate that to other people.
Unfortunately, not. That's
So
something
it's
that
on the
should
scientists
exist.
themselves.
Kind of. I can. It's a bit of a rant, but I will explain how sort of it works in science in comparison to how it would work in media. So we have very specific like modes of action for getting your research right and publishing it. And within science, right, that is for other scientists. Like you write your paper, like you do your study on whatever it is, doesn't matter what topic, um, and you have to write in a very concise way. So it's very specialized language, and you're writing for other people who are studying your field. Um, and you write in a very specific way. You publish a paper. That paper then goes to a journal, right? Which will be sort of like a broader topic, whether it be like, say, for example, like mine, like Journal of Endocrinology, because that's the field of study that would cover the thing that I'm studying, right?
Sure.
So you submit it to a journal, and then the journal goes, okay, this seems good. We'll get someone to peer review this, which is a very important system. So basically, another scientist who can understand your work will then take a look at that, look over it. And it's quite important because they check for validity of your study. Like, did you mess up on your statistics and come to a completely different conclusion to what you should have done, right? Um,
Does peer review include reproducing results, or is that something that's like meant to
no.
be doable but isn't? Okay.
It so in terms of like repeating someone's study, it's something that happens, especially if it's a controversial or brand new sort of paper that comes out. Someone will go, "Well, I want to repeat this," right? Um, like your study, like the way you publish your research, you should have enough information that someone can take your paper, whatever you've written, and reproduce it. Like that's part of the system, right? Like you should have detailed instructions on your methods. Like there's a set out way. It's like writing a list of instructions on exactly everything you did, what you used, the conclusions you got, um, and someone should be able to take that and reproduce it. Should is the keyword there because that's not always how things go. A lot of the times there'll be studies where people will take the exact same things and they can't reproduce it, right? And then you have to question, well, was this a valid study? Did he actually ever get did the researcher ever get these results, um, or was it a stroke of luck? Was it literally luck, like maybe the environment, something in the environment,
Sure.
was it an external thing or was there something not recorded that was an important factor, right? Like there's quite a few things that could be missed out. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen during the peer review process. It's way more likely that say a competing lab would go see that paper and then try and reproduce it, especially if it's an important finding. Um, because if you can confirm that that is something that actually happens, that's awesome. Like, is this a true study where this thing's happened and I can confirm that that happens because I've now done it twice, right? The value of that information, it makes it way more valuable,
Sure.
right?
And
Because you essentially have confirmation.
that's like a problem with all sorts of
Hmm.
popular research is that we got up to the part where the paper got published in a journal and then somebody like clued into it at that point, and it may not even be peer reviewed yet, and it certainly hasn't been reproduced. And then they like publish a thing about how this particular diet will cure heart disease or something, and it's not actually true.
Yeah. So yeah, you can have, because you can publish preliminary findings, right? So you can start a study, maybe it's like a 4 or 5 year study, right? And so you're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, we have a year of results. I want to publish this, right? I want to let people know what we're up to. And obviously, publishing is a big part. I think it's important to mention a big part of like the science ecosystem. So if you work in a lab, right, you want to be making good scientific research. And if you're making good scientific research, you will be producing papers really often, right? And the more papers, good papers, especially if they get into good journals, that means your lab's doing quite well. And obviously, if your lab's doing well, you can apply for more funding. You're more likely to be able to do broader or more expensive studies, have more students. So the way scientific sort of like the hierarchy, I guess, like within a lab, um, the people who are above you will get put on your study as authors. There's a specific order to it, but having people under you publishing things is really good. So there is also that pressure that when you're doing research and you're spending money on research, that you do need to be producing papers. So there's like external pressure for that as well.
It's
Um,
like streaming. You have to get your like highlights every month so that people keep coming to your channel and subbing with Twitch Prime.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. um, let me scroll down. But yeah, so like the main problem is that there is no one who sits there and goes, okay, make this understandable for the general masses, right? You write your very
Sure.
topic specific article, you then submit it to your publisher, then gets published. Um, and really, the only people who understand that are other people in the same field of study, right? Because you use it's very specific. Like you can sit there and Google every single acronym and catch up. You can do that.
Eventually,
Um,
yeah.
but it's not easy. It's a significant barrier.
A scientific
Um,
paper might not even be something that someone in your field would understand all parts of, right? You might have like a
yes.
section of it which is like conclusions, and anyone in your field could read that and be like, oh, okay. But then some of your methodology might be something
Oh,
new that other
100%.
people wouldn't really get.
And then there's a lot of issues with so basically what happens when you publish is there's a paywall, right? um, unless you're part of a like a university institution which will have a lot of licenses to a lot of journals, papers get locked behind a paywall, right? And that's usually for the journal. The scientist behind the article doesn't get money from that, right? But the issue with that is that it makes it very hard for the general public to access articles. And then on top of that, you can usually see the abstract, right? You won't be able to see conclusions, which is probably the most important part, right? Um, the abstract essentially is what the author writes as a general description of their study, right?
Sure.
Um, but they get to write that how they want to write it. So it shouldn't be biased, but
But it might be.
you can say something in your abstract that you found, but if you then go and look in the article, it may come up and go, well, this is actually not significant. We just wanted to mention it because it's interesting. But if you go and look at the findings, there's like certain statistics for significance. Like, is this an actual thing or is it chance, right? Um, and you may not have a strong enough link to say, yes, X causes Y, or this is significant, but you may mention it in the abstract because it's an interesting point, right? Because you're trying to get people to read your article.
So it's sort of like a
Um,
hook rather
Potentially,
than
and
a accurate
um, yeah, but
communication.
that's why the whole picture is quite important, right? It's like the tip of the iceberg. You've got the abstract, which is sort of like the shiny looking, please click on this, please read me. Here's what my study's about. And then the rest is your methods, your study, your discussion, and the actual in depth of what actually happened and what resources you got. Like, it's like the problem is that you can also um, one of the things that's quite important is that you can manipulate your statistics, right? Um, like this is all on the science side of things, but like you can manipulate your statistics, or for example, you can create like supplementary data, right? which could be very important, but you make it harder to access. It's like an extra file right on the end, out of sight, right? You
Okay.
don't necessarily want people to look at that. You cherry pick your good data,
Right.
put that front and center, right? And you go,
Yeah.
this is great. And then you go, supplementary data in the corner, right? And you go look at the supplementary data and you go, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
Like whether it be just weird data that doesn't make any sense or if it disproves the other argument they're getting, but it is something that happens. And one of the things, at least we do learn this in university when you're studying science. You learn how to look for a good and bad paper.
Sure.
That's beyond before you even try and tell the general public about it, right? You
Yeah.
need to know
So
if it's good.
so from this academic paper that's behind a paywall, how does it get on like MSNBC or something? And then I read 3 paragraph things saying that scientists have cured cancer again, or sorry, may have cured cancer again.
May have cured cancer.
That
Yeah.
article is
So
published every week, right?
yeah. So there are certain there are open access journals as well. I guess there are some that aren't behind a paywall, but if you see an article, say it's in cancer research, and you go, "Oh, that looks really interesting," um, I mean, Chad's mentioning here, it's like you can actually contact the author of a paper.
Yes, or you can
Like
sci-hub it,
99% of
or
us,
yeah,
yeah, like would be happy to send it to you. The only issue I can see with that when it links into people wanting to publish things for new media, I guess we'll call it, so like websites and stuff like that, is that scientists are not necessarily the most on top of their emails, and it might take them a while to get back to you. I can definitely see um, people getting impatient with that, and you could potentially make conclusions from an abstract, or if you did pay for the paper, you've sort of glossed through it, you've taken the top section and gone, something to do with cancer. There's some cool laser
yeah.
thing.
Did you
We'll
see
ignore the fact.
the viral clip about how Bloomberg could have paid every American more than $1 million with the money he spent on his campaign, where they just like did the math and were off by $1 million? Like
Oh
they were
god.
just wrong by that much. The I can imagine a journalist sitting down and reading a scientific paper and coming away with the wrong idea and then
Oh, 100%.
publishing that. Yeah, that
Especially if
seems
you have to
very
Google every
plausible.
second word and you're trying to understand, right?
Yeah.
And one of the points we'll bring up later is you need to look at who's reporting this information and if they have a science background. Like that's going to be a very big takeaway.
Sure.
Because one of the most important things is that what's really hard, and the hardest part of science communication of any description, is you're taking a really complicated subject and then you need to make it so someone with no background knowledge understands, right? Because you have to assume that they don't have 6 years of science, right? They don't have 6 years of science behind them.
Yeah.
They're not going to understand, so say when we want to talk about gene editing, right? To understand what gene editing is, you need to know how cells work, like what's in a cell, what is DNA, what is DNA made of, what are genes, how do genes work? Genes aren't on all the time in every single cell. How is that different? The fact that they can be activated differently. Like there's a lot of background information that sort of helps that make sense. But if you don't know that, what's like an easy, concise, quick way to inform people of that without making them bored because you want them to read about the cool bit, right?
So for coronavirus, for hand washing, the number that's going around is you're meant to lather your hands for 20 seconds. And
Yep.
so in order to make that even more simple, the thing is like you should sing happy birthday twice or whatever.
Twice? Yeah, yeah.
And then
Um,
I read somebody saying, I actually can't remember music at all, so that doesn't help me. And I was like, oh my gosh, it must
can you
be
count to
so
20?
complicated. It must be
Can you
so
count?
difficult to communicate this stuff to everybody. If
Yeah,
like,
and it's like,
how long is happy birthday? Like that's too
oh
complicated
god.
for depending on who you are, right? Different people have different
Yeah,
brains and different things are easy for them.
exactly. And yeah, so the thing is, you have to assume that people don't know anything. Like most people will, but you do have to. Sorry, God damn it. You do sort of have to keep in mind that It's like I don't necessarily want to forgive the people who publish media about science because there's a lot of garbage that goes out and there's a lot of pressure on them. But at the same time, it's like just keep it simple. Keep it simple. You know, you want to use like very to the point language. You know, a lot of the issues with a lot of the articles, especially coming out currently, are like super emotionally charged articles.
Oh yeah.
And it's like rather than like here are the facts, it's like fear, panic. Oh, here's a really good valid point, but you're too busy, you're too scared right now to even process the fact that I've actually given you good advice.
Sure. And as a reader of science, I can relate to that being something that gets me invested in an article. So I understand why they do it.
Yeah, 100%. It's like you need to, well, you need it to be interesting, because otherwise no one's going to read it. We're in a society right now where if I look at the title and I go, don't know what that is, don't care, right? Won't click on it. We're very much in a, you either need to grab my attention immediately or I'm not going to click on it.
Sure.
And by making it interesting, as we were saying, are you over exaggerating, right? And then people will get excited about something. For example, saying new cure to cancer, right? And then it's like, well, you have to think about the fact that it's like, okay, well, for what cancer? Like saying, oh, we've found a new medication that'll help with, I don't know, gastrointestinal cancer is a lot less sexy on a newspaper than new cure for cancer, right?
I don't even know where my gastrointestine is. I don't even
Your guts.
thought I
It's
had
your
a
guts.
small one and a large one.
But you know, like we definitely live in like in a world where if it's not interesting, we don't care, and that's probably the biggest struggle. On top of like trying to make super specific information easier to process, it's then making that easy to process information interesting so someone will actually read it, because the whole point is you want people to read it, you want
Yeah.
people to be educated, right? If you're coming from a science communication side of things, the most important things are education, so actually getting people to read and process the things, and then the ease of information, making it easy to understand, right?
Sure.
um,
Do you want
we do
to... Shall we jump into climate change? You want to make like one
uh,
more point in general and then we can start looking at examples?
yeah, I have I yeah, so the only thing I wanted to mention, like sort of like on top of, um I've written essentially like a list of things to look out for,
Okay.
like article wise, like this is like a good, like I'm trying to be a more informed reader. What should I do to, like what are some like top tips essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the media doesn't necessarily follow the same rules that science communication does or science communicator does. Sometimes they cross over, but not always. And we have issues of, you know, people being misinformed. And one of the most important things is like people tend to believe the first thing they read, and then you have to convince them otherwise, right?
Sure.
Like that's the struggle. So for the checklist, it's like if you're looking at an article, what is the title? Is it sensational? Is it descriptional? Is it clickbait? Does it actually talk about what it talks about in the article, or is it a completely different thing to get you to click on it, right?
Sure.
And then we have who's writing this, right? So take a moment, investigate who wrote the article. Normally they have their name attached, so take a click, Google them. Are they a science writer? What do they usually write? What's their background? Um, you know, who are they and why are they writing about this? A lot of them will be science communicators. We'll see in one of my examples that not all of them are.
Sure.
Next is tone of writing. Is it emotional or is it factual? Are they trying to induce panic and fear, or are they trying to just be like, here are the facts, dot points, like these are the things you need to know? Or are they trying to like bias you to have either a positive or negative emotion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think
The next thing,
sometimes you get the positive emotional stuff with like pseudoscience as well, where it's like this diet will change your life.
yeah,
Notice that happening a lot too.
Um, yeah. So the next, like this is like a like checklist. So it's like date and time. When was it written? When was it produced? Obviously, there are any sort of scientific sources listed, the same thing, right? Research is being published every day. Things are being updated every single day. If you're reading an article from 4 years ago, it might not be right.
Sure.
Try and find something newer. So, like when it's been published is quite important, because a lot of things can change,
Yeah,
and
it's
people can certainly,
really,
yeah.
oh my God, it's so hard to keep up on this stuff. If you are a
Mm,
layperson who wants to keep up on GMO science, for example, like,
yeah,
okay, so I like read a book and now I know about GMOs, right? But then like a year
yeah,
later, something different is happening.
yeah.
It's a constant,
Um, if
constant
only
thing.
because it's like it is anything that's like a current area of research where it's constantly being researched, is just like there are new things coming out, and unless you are like in the forefront of that, you're not going to have all that information. There are I will note there are Cochrane reviews for health science, which is essentially it's like a systematic review system. They basically take an area, like a topic in health science. They will then have like a strict criteria to cut out, like either say it's a study with only like a sample size of 3 people, and you're like, okay, well, that gets cut out because it's just not big enough of a sample size. Like they'll have criteria, and they publish for health science big, um, what's it called? Sort of like reviews. It's a systematic review. They basically go, here's the overview on the topic currently, and they update. And they have a really one for COVID, which I can link in chat if people are interested.
Sweet.
But for the last point, just because I know you want to get to actually talking about one of them, is make sure you pay attention to where something is published. If it's published on Facebook or a mum blog, is it a news site? Do you trust them to publish scientific information? If you wouldn't trust them to talk about social issues, like who's dating who, and that's what they normally publish, probably don't like take what they're saying with publishing science with like, a side of caution is probably the most important thing.
Do you think you don't have to have a developed opinion on this, but if
That
somebody sees an article that's clearly bad and they like tweet it out to a bunch of people and they say, "Oh my God, look at how bad this article is," do you think that just showing that article to lots of people, even though you said it was bad, is likely to see people reading it and thinking it's true?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's good and bad things about like our age of communication. Sadly, because you are then bringing that article into popularity, people will then click on it, and then they'll share it to other friends, and they may not necessarily share it in the same context that you initially shared
Right.
it. So you put it on the internet, you go, this is terrible. Someone else looks at it and goes, oh, what's this article? Maybe doesn't even read what you've written, right? Goes, oh, how cool. Oh, I'll share this to my friend.
Or like Google
Yeah.
sees that it's getting shared on Twitter a lot, and then when somebody Googles the subject material, Google just puts it at the top of the results without the qualifying thing
Yeah.
saying this is
Yeah.
dumb.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, that's very true.
Unfortunately.
So if we want to look at climate change, we'll take I have an interesting article to look at. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Sweet.
So essentially, like what is climate change? Essentially, it's a highly contested topic that has been for like quite a while. It initially started as global warming. We basically noticed that through a various amount of studies, and the world's getting hotter, right? And we noticed that there was a correlation with the time it was getting hotter with the fact that we started burning fossil fuels. We were more industrial. We were, putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And we go, okay, you've probably all heard this before. Okay, the world's getting hotter. And now we have updated that terminology to climate change. So it's not just the world getting warmer, right? Some areas are getting colder. There are changes to climate. We have more extreme weather cycles. If you live in Australia, you'll know this firsthand, or you've had fires, floods, and everything else in the first 2 months of this year, right? And like we have extreme weather cycles now that are abnormal compared to previous trends. Like say the few degrees hotter, like it's like 0.5 or 1.5, I think. Like the fact that we
That's
now have more
Celsius,
warmer
right?
days. Yeah, Celsius. Sorry.
which is
We'll
like
have
15 Fahrenheit or something. Oh my god, we're all gonna die.
I hope
Sorry,
not.
was that bad? That was
um,
bad science communication. I'm sorry.
1.5 Celsius to
It's like
Fahrenheit.
4 or
Oh, that's
something.
not going to convert it right, is it? I don't
No,
know what
it's
an
4 or something
increase
though.
by one. Yeah, something like that. Um, so the main issues we have is the fact that we have a lot of different opinions. The main issue is fear mongering. We sort of have two camps. We have the world is ending, the world's on fire, the world's burning. You need to
Yes.
do something about this right now, or the world's going to end in like 20 years, and it's all your fault, right? We have that camp, which is probably the very extreme side of things, right? It's quite extreme, but they're trying to scare you into action, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of have we have obviously we have the middle camp, but like we have the other side, which is head in the sand. It's not happening. It's clearly some life trend, like what it's a trend over the centuries. It's going to go back down. I don't think it's anything to do with human involvement. You guys are trying to scare us into action when we don't need to. So you sort of have those two opposing ends, right?
Sure.
And like the main issue we have here is that you need the middle ground, but the middle ground isn't really attractive to report on because it's like, okay, well, it's not extreme. The world isn't going to end in the next decade, but we do need to do something. We're not in the camp of ignoring it, right? But we're also not panicking that the world's imminently about to end. We can do something because I feel like
We have.
uh,
Hmm.
oh,
Keep going. I'll try to
so
phrase that thought better and say it later.
yeah, it's okay. Like this is probably one of, I mean, they're all pretty bad for fear mongering, like because that's the main thing. That's the issue with a lot of the articles that we'll look at. We'll look at this one, which is, um, has used science in a bad way, essentially. But I'll let you take a look. Do you want me to link it to chat or just to you?
Yeah, link it to chat, and I'll try
All
to put it
right.
up on screen as well.
Take a look at this article and let me know how you feel, chat. Um, and then we can apply the checklist if you would like that I wrote out for you before.
IFL Science. The
Yeah,
website is
it's
called Science, so it must be accurate scientific
yeah,
information.
yeah.
That's just logic.
So I'm just gonna move this on my screen so I can see it a bit better. So it's like you look at the title and it's like it's clickbaity, right? Oh yeah, there's a big skull image. It's very scary.
Yeah, the big
Very
skull
scary.
image is
Big
pretty
skull on top.
incredible.
But if you look at the guy who wrote it, you go, okay, well, who's James Felton, right? And he goes, so his self-description is James is a writer with a big interest in anything weird, from strange new creatures to horrifying medical conditions. And I go, okay, well, this doesn't really tell me anything about him. So I looked him up, right? And he is a self-proclaimed comedy writer and author, right? So if you want to think about, do I trust this person to accurately convey scientific information to me? They do link to an actual report, Plura. So if you do look at the report that they link to, it is a report talking about the extreme situation. So
Apparently it's
the
only
report they
3
link to,
Fahrenheit. Sorry.
yeah,
Apparently it's only 3 Fahrenheit, not 4. I was wrong.
yeah. So this article is on the side of the world's ending imminently. It's almost too late, right? But if you look at what the article that they reference, that they base this article on, it's a prediction of what the worst scenario could be, and then they've taken that worst scenario and go, this is what's going to happen,
Sure.
right? And so it's an example of misrepresenting science, right? Because people will click on this, right? And they'll go, oh my god, big skull, big scary, gotta know what's going on here, right?
This is a constant thing in science reporting. There's like
Yeah.
all the studies for an issue where there are lots of studies. There are all the different studies, and then the one that's the most extreme in one direction and the one that's the most extreme in the other direction are the two that people talk about. And then it's like whichever news outlet it is tries to frame it in the way that's most appealing to their readers, and
Yeah.
and they just have like one link to the
Um,
one report, which is part of like hundreds or thousands of report on
yeah,
climate
exactly. Like
change right
there'll
now.
be most of the stuff for climate change. I can't remember what the committee is called, but they basically got a group of people from all over the world to like summarize things, and that's quite useful. But at the same time, it's like there's always going to be an amount of skepticism. Because it's like, well, do I trust? How do I know who's on that committee? Do I trust the people involved? Do I trust them to give good information to contribute to this? Like, it's all the questions you've got to ask yourself. And it's quite easy to sort of switch that part of your brain and just sort of read whatever's put out as surely they're telling the truth because it's science, right?
Sure. I think an
Um,
interesting thing with climate change too is that it's like one of 7 ways that the world could possibly end in the next 30 years or whatever. Like there are
yeah,
lots of different ways that
yeah,
things could go terribly. And so if you're sitting here being like thinking about what humans should do, you have to come up with some solution that's going to like any solution to climate change cannot destabilize geopolitics to the point where we have a nuclear war that blows up the planet, for
yeah.
example.
Because we still end then.
Yeah, so
Like,
you have to,
want to continue to exist.
yes, there the solution space is a little bit complicated and
Um,
nuanced and stuff.
the
And
problem is
yeah,
that no one's really, because I tried to find something that was like a middle ground, and it's very much it's either at least what seems to be published and is the easiest to find, like on Google or Facebook or wherever you're looking, is very much it's not, hey, here are kind of the facts objectively. I think this is what we should do. It's very much either we haven't done enough or I don't want to do anything. I haven't really found anything. I'm sure it's out there, right? But it's not easy to find something that goes, okay, well, this is what we can do without like the fear aspect because we don't need that, right? Fear just makes people not actually engage with things, right? Um, and it's really hard to find that middle ground, which is why when you're reading these articles, like the thing I want to sort of like get through to people the most is just take everything you read on the internet with a grain of salt, right? And the best thing you can do for you is be informed about what you're reading. So, you know, if you think something's worth sharing, that's great. But just like keep in mind, like what we mentioned for like who's written it, where you finding it, and that'll help a lot with what you want to take on information wise, right? You can be a little bit more, I guess, self informed.
sure. Was there anything good that you had to say about this article
Um,
other than
uh, oh, anything good about this particular
this
article?
particular article? Yeah,
Um, I mean, it's not great, right? This is pretty much like a bad example. It's not a bad example because it talks about the worst case scenario. It's a bad example because it um, presents it as a immediate possible scenario, right?
sure.
So the issue I have here is uh, while it's based in science, you're misrepresenting the facts. You're twisting it for a different narrative, if that makes sense.
Sure. I
So this
like
isn't something I would recommend.
I like that it links the report that it's talking about
Yes,
so that
that
I
is
can
good.
actually go read the thing and find out what it actually says. Although, is it like behind a paywall? I don't.
No, 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 no. You should be able to read that one.
You can actually read it. Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
really nice. It like goes directly to a
yeah.
PDF. I appreciate that as a reader
But it
because
is
that's not
hard to
always how it
read, and it's a
works.
lot. Like I guess
It's
the thing is,
11
someone might
pages
open
long.
that and go, ooh, yeah. It's long enough that less people will probably, you know, process it. I'm reading on the internet. You have a degree in science. As I said before, take everything I say with a grain of salt. All right. um, you know, the whole point is that we're having a discussion. I'm not necessarily telling you what is true and what is, you know, false. All right.
Cool. I like that at the end of the article. I haven't clicked on these links yet, but
Hmm.
it like links to an IPCC report. Um,
Hmm.
I don't. What are these links to? I wonder.
But
These links are to other articles on the same website. Okay, never mind. I take it back. I hate it.
Yeah. So the issue is that is I probably wouldn't see that as a reputable source of information. If you
Yeah.
take a look at the website, you go, oh, okay. They want to be science communicators, and some of the articles on that website are written well, but I think it does depend on um, who's writing them. So that's quite an important thing. Like a lot of the articles, if they're written by someone who has a science background, they tend to like make a lot more sense. The ones that aren't are very much more fear mongering, spooky, scary. You know.
Okay. So eventually you can click on links and get to the actual IPCC
Yeah.
report, which I feel like I always like these big PDFs from an actual scientific organization, which actually lay out, hey, there's all sorts of stuff going on and it's sort of complicated, and you can see pretty graphs and stuff if you'd like.
It's better than letting you speculate, I suppose.
Oh yeah,
The thing
this
is, I
this
guess,
is
is
that
they
good
form their
shit.
opinion based on it. And it is really good to look for sources, by the way. You'll probably get a way better I guess point of view on things if you go back and you actually look for the original sources of information, especially if you're questioning the validity of something. If you go back and look at those, it can be very useful.
Cool.
So many numbers.
I generally enjoy reports that are done by international organizations as like recommendations to nations or policymakers internationally, because I feel like they have awareness that there is other stuff going on in the world and you can't just like do anything. You have to like do things that make sense relative to what else is happening. So for example, we talk is it are nitrogen and carbon the two main greenhouse gases? Is it nitrous oxide or something, not nitrogen? I don't remember.
No, nitric oxide is fine.
So
Um,
anyway, we talk about reducing carbon
yeah,
largely not because it's
yeah,
the only greenhouse gas, but because it's the one that's easiest to reduce. It's like the best return on investment in terms of reducing greenhouse gases compared to how difficult it is to reduce other ones that are going on
yeah.
for the most part.
I mean, methane's what, CH4? I think chat. Yeah, so it's like mainly carbon based, but it's also, I guess, it's a lot of what we're doing, right? So if you look at our contribution, like as humans, it's one of the biggest contributors, right?
Sure.
And if it's something that we've done, we can then do something about it. It's a lot harder for us to be like, well, there's an earthquake and it releases, a bunch of gases in the atmosphere. Like we can do less about that, right?
Absolutely.
Sorry, Dirt. This phrasing is probably not the clearest there. Do you want me to answer Onion Knight in chat?
Sure. Do you want to do questions now or at the end? I guess is the only
I mean,
thing.
we can do questions at the end if that's easier, because we can go through the other two topics and then ask.
Let's try to do questions at the end then.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So, general thoughts on climate change are that it's hard to find the middle ground of reporting. Both
Yeah.
sides have pretty like emotionally charged, culturally invested
Yeah.
arguments that they're using. And one thing that I think about a lot with climate change and with these issues in general is that I only need to read about this enough to make changes in my life. So,
Yeah.
for example, it's useful for me to read that a certain um, very easy change in my life, like turning the lights off when I leave the room, would save a bunch of power and that would cause me to like have less of an environmental footprint. Like, cool, because that's like free. Like, I don't even have to pay any. In fact, I get paid for
Yeah.
that. My power bill goes down. So like
Yeah.
it's useful for me to read articles like that where it's like if they ask you plastic or paper bags at the grocery store, go for this one because it's better. Stuff like that is useful for me. Stuff which is like we are going to all die in 30 years, that's not very useful for me. It doesn't
Yeah.
allow me to live
I
my life in a more useful way, really.
Yeah, like that information is essentially most useful for the people who need to make policies and sort of have a higher responsibility in terms of like lawmaking and stuff. Like, so what you're talking about is what can you do? What? So taking it out of the context of, okay, well, I can't stop every mining operation from happening. Like, I can't do that, but what can I do, right? Which is try and reduce your personal waste, try and do commit to recycling, use less plastic, like sort of like personal responsibility things. You can feel like you're doing something, right? Um, and a lot of those are just going to be like waste reduction is one of the biggest things because contributing to landfill is terrible as humans. You know, and
Waste
there's like a lot of
reduction,
those.
sustainability, going down the
Yeah,
yeah. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about this year is about basically using resources more efficiently, repurposing food that would be wasted to feed people, for example, is
yeah,
one of the most
exactly.
powerful things we can do to help with famine in the world at the moment.
Yeah, reducing food waste is important.
Cool.
And then because yeah, that kind of leads us into the next bit. Like our population is only getting bigger, and so we need more food. But are we effectively distributing that?
That is a good lead
You
into
know,
GMOs. Talk about
yeah. So
GMOs?
yeah, so oh, big scary GMOs.
Big
So if you
scary.
don't know, GMO means genetically modified organism. It means that there has been a specific change genetically to an organism, whether it be an added protein, whether it be anything that's done in a lab, right? So it's different from. It's not scary plural, but everyone sees it as scary. Everything I've read is like, oh God, what are they? And it's mainly a lack of understanding of what it is, right? And a lot of branding, which is um, it's been fun to market things as anti-GMO, especially a lot of the stuff I've seen in America. It's like while they didn't say GMO was bad, they're like, well, there isn't GMOs in this. So then you
Yeah.
sort of make the brain connection of like, well, they're telling me there's no GMOs, so those must be bad, right? Like that's sort of like a brain trend that um, will influence people. So selective breeding, I guess I'll touch on quickly, is something we've been doing for years. We basically see traits in things. We go, okay, well, um, this cow has grown a lot bigger than this cow, and then this cow's also grown bigger. So I'm going to breed those two cows together and hope I get a bigger cow. And you do that over like
Is it called
generations
like
and generations.
breeding for corn as well, or is there a different name
Oh,
for
it's
a
yeah,
food
selective
crop?
breeding.
Selective breeding. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's basically when you see like essentially observable traits. So something you can see, right? Whether it be like bigger corn kernels or whatever, right? And then you try to amplify those traits by breeding those specific ones together, right? So if we look at GMO is basically like the specific version of that. So you go, um, I see this trait, right? And I want to put that in something else that I couldn't just breed together, right? So say you want to take something from a tomato and put it in like random suggestion, but take something from a tomato and you want to put it in an apple, and you can't naturally breed those together and crossbreed, right? Just like they're not compatible, like the genetics are too different, etc. So you go, okay, well, I'm going to cut out this specific gene, right? um which say, I don't know, maybe it makes the outside of the apple stronger. Like this is all hypothetical, this is not an actual situation, right?
Sure.
Say that I can take some gene that produces a protein that makes it stronger, and maybe that means that it's harder for pests to get into the apple. So it's not just like physical looks, it has like a function that'll mean that maybe you can grow more apples, right? Make a stronger apple, makes the outside stronger. Hypothetical situation, you go, okay, well, if we can do that, then the benefit of that is we have this stronger apple. And when we grow the apples, there are less pests, so maybe we have to do. Oh, yeah. Sometimes it's for looks, but there's less of a drive for that. So it's you're a lot more likely to go further with something if you're actually improving something, rather than like it looks nicer, right? It's harder to argue like, hey, I'm doing this genetic modification and spending a lot of money, um, to make something look nicer, or is it I've made it more nutritious? Is probably a lot easier to argue, right?
Sure.
Um, But yeah, so you essentially very specifically take a gene, put it somewhere else, you test it, you see if it works, right? Um, and that's like the basic concept, right, of GMO. You're basically trying to genetically improve something, right? So like the issues with GMO, I guess, that have come up that a lot of people are like unhappy about. So some people see it as an unnatural process. You're going against the laws of nature by mixing things together that would naturally be able to mix, right?
Mm,
It's a point that can be made. I
I
don't
understand.
agree with
I
it,
mean, it's like
right?
it's a weird point because it's like a point that doesn't apply to agriculture, really. Like, if the purpose of agriculture is to make us healthy food, then
Yeah,
this is like a belief system about what is right that doesn't have actually much relevance to agriculture, I don't think.
yeah.
Um,
Um,
so
but
yeah, it's
it
hard to
in terms
deal
of
with
public
that.
opinion, it's an issue because it's like
It is an issue
uh,
with public opinion for sure.
a lot of it is um it's yeah, well, like so I don't necessarily agree, don't get me wrong, yeah, exactly, nylon's unnatural. But in terms, I guess it's because it's food and it's something you consume rather than wear, or I don't necessarily understand this. Obviously, I'm very,
Certainly
yeah,
American consumers have had unhealthy food sold to them for a very long time, although like I don't think the GMO thing has much to do with it. Like, I understand wanting healthy
yeah,
food as a consumer of food in the US, where obesity is a huge problem and fast food is
yeah,
everywhere and stuff, but it seems like that mindset has somehow been like accidentally attached to GMOs, where like, no,
yeah.
this is just rice that grows better. Like, that we haven't
Yeah, like
we
because the whole
didn't
point
make
is
this
that like we
unhealthy.
need more. Yeah, like our main thing is like we need more food to feed the increasing amount of people, and our land is becoming harder and harder to grow things on. How do we make it so food survives better so we can feed everyone? Like that's the overall goal, right? And because of our sort of fear of GMO, we've talked about this before, but we have single propagation wheat, like which basically, um, because we didn't want this modified wheat, right, to be able to crossbreed um, with other things. That's kind of an important point. So we go, oh god, we don't want to do that. So we'll make wheat that just propagates once. It just grows once, cut it down, whatever, and then you have to buy more, right?
Sure.
So we made that because it was more of a, we can make this that sort of allays the fears that it's going to
Yeah.
crossbreed into
And
everything
I
else,
get that
right?
argument a lot better. Like, if a
Yeah,
crop gets a competitive advantage for growing and then it gets off your farm and into a national park or something, then all of a sudden your national park is going to have this crop infestation, and
yeah.
that can
Or for
screw up your
example,
ecosystem
if you
somewhat.
have an organic farm next to or like somewhere nearby, right? Um, and then you also have a GMO farm. Like a lot of the issues you can get is that the fact that we've created this technology, right, is then when it got abused. So the original idea of the fact that it only grows once, it was more of like a, like you think about it, you can see how it would be created because it's more of like a safety thing, and then they can go, okay, well, sales team has gone and run with that and realized that that means that you can make it so they buy off you every year, right? That's definitely a bad side. That's less of like the science side and more of this the person who's gone, um, you know, well now I can make a bunch of money off that. Sweet, because sadly that's still
Wasn't
how the world works.
wasn't there a thing with like farms that were adjacent to farms with like intellectual property GMO crops, having the crops spread and then
Yeah.
getting sued for like,
I don't know the
wasn't that a
specific
thing?
example, but it sounds familiar. Where yeah, the patent system, both in science and especially when it comes to crops and things like that, is kind of scary. And I can't remember if it was, say you own this crop and then it cross pollinates over to someone else's crop and then it starts growing. I can't remember if the person who has it accidentally growing would then have to pay because then they've got someone else's crop growing. I don't know the specific example. Um,
Yeah, I think there have been a few
Yeah,
different things, and
but I
probably
could
the reporting on
definitely,
them is
yeah,
sensationalized, right? Like, probably
yeah,
it's a little bit exaggerated in some places, but also the idea that a very large business that has their own GMOs has more resources and legal resources and so on and so forth to take advantage of a smaller farmer or whatever makes some sense. So I think the general issue that we're driving at here is that it's hard to decide who like owns these and
yeah.
who
And
gets to
especially because the
profit, sort of.
state, right? Like if you create something and then it crossbreeds and then you have something else, it's you know, who owns that now? Is it yours? Is it theirs? Is it still theirs because that was where it originated from? Yeah, I'm from Australia, so I guess like in reading chat, like my perspective on things is slightly different. We do have a lot of different systems here.
Sure, yeah.
I don't necessarily know all of the ones that happen, especially in America, where it's very much a different system, right? Um, but
So,
yeah,
so these are our
it's
issues, but
different.
our positives are like billions more people will get to eat food. So we
Yeah,
have
like
a
like if you look at the
pretty
positives of GMO
vested
crop, yeah,
interest in trying to make this work.
yeah, and there are also um, in other countries where they have less like nutrients available in the soil, you can make certain plants that are nutrient enriched, right? So they put nutrients back into the soil and then you can grow other crops. Like that's quite important. And obviously, if you can edit those to increase, um, like a lot of the issues we have at the moment, like linking back into climate, is that our climates have changed. We've over farmed a lot of areas. If we're able to,
Sure. So maybe we can adapt to
yeah,
changing farmland faster.
yeah, like what one of the biggest points is like if we can make things survive better, right? And grow in really hard to grow areas, or um, maybe we make food more nutrient rich so you don't have to grow as much food, right? Like the food's better rather than having to grow more food. The food is more nutrient rich, right? Um, that's quite important. Or maybe you can make the fruit grow bigger, like the same thing we did with corn, but accelerated, right? Um, that part of it's quite important.
Can you think of another like technology that we have invented where the way that it was owned was like the destructive thing about it? I'm
As in
sure there
like
are
the
tons.
patent.
Sure.
Um,
I feel like this is even more than that, though. Like, this is a new technology for agriculture, but the fact that a few businesses have a huge proportion of the stake in it is making agriculture have some issues with getting the full benefits of it.
um, I can't think of like a specific example. Obviously, like a lot more of my background's in like biomedical science. I can think of medical devices that have been used in similar ways. But
Medical devices.
like, so say if you look at things like insulin,
Oh,
we learned
sure. So
how
insulin
to.
costs going up to, yeah,
Yeah, it's obviously very different here, but we basically used to. We figured out a way to put insulin in bacteria and make it so they rapidly. Well, you can not only make significantly more of it, you can produce human insulin, right? And that was like the big breakthrough. Um, is basically to explain it very simply, because we'll talk about CRISPR soon anyway. But you basically have these circular DNA, and you can basically insert the gene to produce human insulin into a bacteria, and you can mass farm
sure.
insulin, make it produce insulin, um, and that is a major breakthrough that we had. But for a while, it was, you know, I guess it's one of those things where you're like, well, do we put things under a paywall, or do we get what do you give people what they need, right? Or do you go, we can make a lot of money out of this? And that's a big problem in the science industry with patents and everything else, is that we can have really, really good inventions, but then people go, well, you're torn between like, this is my intellectual property, I made this, right? And then do I then let people use it because I know it'll be a greater help for humanity if I don't keep it to myself, right? And
Do
that's
you,
quite difficult.
I feel like a huge amount of the research that this is a problem for is like funded in public universities, um,
Mm.
or like it's military resource research where the military is funded by taxpayer money. And so it
Well, I
always
guess, yeah.
feels to me like it's weird that you would not have a like obligation to get that research
Mm.
doing good things in the society that paid for a lot
Yeah,
of
I
it.
guess it's the thing that's kind of brought up in chat is science and research is really expensive. You can spend billions of dollars developing something,
Mm,
and then if you just, tell everyone else how to do it, you don't necessarily recoup the costs that you spent on it in the first place, which is a big problem actually with antibiotics, is that we are not really producing new ones because they're very expensive
how
and very
many?
quickly.
I don't
Um,
know this at all. Maybe you do. Like how how much of that research is like taxpayers are paying the billions of dollars versus like a
um,
company specifically is paying it?
I mean, it would vary depending on where you are, right? It depends what's currently being studied in healthcare, in what particular area. Is it done by a private institution? Is it done by public? That's going to change no matter where you are. I can't really, like, some of it will be government funded. You'll have, government grants for certain types of research. But it, yeah, it's not necessarily they're like, well, yeah, like one year they may be like, well, we really want to do, we think Alzheimer's is a really big issue, so we're going to put a lot of money into funding for geriatric diseases or illnesses. But it really depends on local funding for that and like grants you
Sure.
can apply for.
So the answer is it depends. Makes
Yeah,
sense to me.
there's no clear
Yeah.
cut answer of this is what this place funds essentially, right? Um, and I guess yeah, one of the biggest things is that it's very expensive. Research is very expensive, no matter what sort of research you're doing. A lot of it is at loss if you think about it. The amount of times where you come through a breakthrough and you come up with something new that's actually going to make money back on the amount of time invested and money invested is low, you know?
Sure. Compared to how many scientists there are, the number of like world-changing technologies that we've invented in the last 50 years, even though this is the time in human history where we have been changing the world most often, I would say. But it's still not that many.
Yeah. So I was just laughing at that. Just pay, throw more unpaid undergrads at it. I'm like, oh god, oh god.
All right, you want to talk
But
about CRISPR as well?
yeah, let's go into
Very
CRISPR while we're
similar
at it.
thing.
Um, so CRISPR-Cas9, which you guys may or may not know about, is a genome editing tool. It's something we discovered in bacteria. It's a natural system from bacteria that it would use to protect itself from invading viruses. Try and explain it simply, at least its function in a bacteria, there would be a virus. It would then, infect the cell. It would take part of the virus and store it, sort of like a memory bank, right? And so next time it appeared, it would sort of have like a matching puzzle piece, sort of like an opposite. Basically, I'm pretty sure it saves like a bit of RNA. But basically, the next time the virus appeared, it's like a memory system. It goes, okay, I can now protect. I know to attack this. And then Cas9 is the enzymatic part. It would then go cut and disable the virus. A few other enzymes can be used, but Cas9 is obviously the most popular one, or like most used. Um, and so we took that natural system and go, oh, it can remember a specific section of DNA, right? And then cut it out, essentially. And we go, well, that's very useful, right? I can then tell that, well, I want it to cut this, and it will go do that. It'll go cut that section out, right?
Sure.
So what, like, if you want to know, like, look, like the reason why it's a very heavily debated thing is that there are so many things we can do with CRISPR, right? Yeah, I'm explaining it at a very, very, very base level. Like it's quite complicated, but we could do a lot with it, right? The ability to basically delete a section of DNA where we don't want it can be very, very advantageous, right? So say you have a certain, you know, uh, I'm trying to think of like a good example of something that could be possible.
And balding.
Um,
Can you
balding?
stop me from balding?
Um, I mean, it probably would be too expensive to be worth it. I think they're looking at like one of the ones I was reading the other night was looking at restoring hearing in mice, where they would basically inject edited cells into the ears, um, and there would be enough that they would be able to hear again and stuff like that. But it's like it's you have to think small changes. I guess DNA is very very complicated. Um, I'm sorry that I didn't. I'm not meaning to jab at you for uh wanting to fix your hairline. It's more so it would be
It's
very
okay.
expensive.
It's okay. Nick's
Technology
gonna
is
send
new
me
and
his hair.
expensive.
It's an easier
Uh
solution.
Stem cell based hair transplants. Yeah, that would probably be more likely, you know. You can already do hair transplants. If you could boost the survivability of that, that would probably be one of the best things, or like prevention.
No, I want to do
Um,
it by editing my DNA, just because it's cooler. I don't care that it's more expensive.
um,
Is this something that will get to a point where it actually isn't that expensive? I know
Most
DNA is like
likely.
very complicated, and
So
this is very
the
new.
leaps and bounds that genome sequencing has made over the last 20 years, where we had the Human Genome Project, which cost so much money to sequence one human genome, right? And now we have, um, you can get genome testing done. It's expensive, but you could actually afford to get your own genome tested now, right? Like that's something you can do. You can get your genome tested. Sure, it might cost, I don't know, Australia might cost you a few grand, right? But you can actually go and get that done. Well, previously that would have cost hundreds and thousands of dollars,
What
right?
is it?
We're getting,
What does it
yeah,
mean to get it tested? They look at. Are they looking for like warning signs or diseases and stuff like
it
that?
it depends how you apply it. Okay, so if you get your genome sequenced, your genome is basically a very specific list of what makes you you, right? It is what's in all of your cells. It's basically a list of your DNA, right?
So like your star
Um,
sign, your favorite magazine.
so for example, like chat's talking about family tree websites. So if you get your genome, like you send up your DNA and they do a genome sequence and they are just giving you information about your family tree, there are specific markers that they're called SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms,
Singular.
that in certain populations, say if they're trying to trace, basically think like a single like point in your DNA, like just one, right? Think of like just one. And there will be, I mean, you got close. You got really close.
I
You did a
got
good job.
close.
You got really close.
Oh yeah,
You
I
also know
understand the
SNPs,
word
right?
singular
Yeah.
myself.
Okay.
That means one.
um,
So uh,
you can look for single point mutations or that are like super common in certain lineages. Like for example, like maybe, um, like a certain background, like because they have information for this. They have databases for this, right? Where they go, people with this background tend to have this, and if you have this single point mutation, it's likely that we can trace you back this way because this person had it, like that sort of thing, right? And there'll be things in common that you can sort of like trace your background back to. I would personally not recommend getting an ancestry test done. Yeah, 23andMe isn't full sequencing either. So if you get your if you get your genome sequenced, there are many things I guess you have to be aware of. Your genome is very similar to your family's, right? You're very closely linked.
yeah.
Be aware that you can find things that are scary, right? And I would very much like, this is something I potentially want to do in the future, maybe, is like see a genetic counselor, right? One of
Ooh.
the things is that you basically get your genome sequenced, you get a big list of everything that makes you you, and what they'll come back with is give you a bunch of risk factors. So you may find out that they go 99% chance that you have a higher risk, and might have, I don't know, a heart attack before 40. And like, how would that information change how you exist, right? If you
I would
now,
just
like, it may
start
not happen,
training for a heart attack
yeah,
every day.
but
Every
like
morning I would wake up.
yeah. But like, it's a chance, right? And we don't know all of the genes in a human. Like we don't know what every single thing did. If we knew what every single thing did, life would be significantly easier, right? But we don't. We're still very much learning. It's still very new to us, right? And there are certain genes related to addiction, but if you're never put in a, like, one of the things that's really, like, this is where I get passionate about because it's what I studied, but it's like in genetics there is nature and nurture, right? There is what your
Sure.
genetics is, and then there's your environment and how your environment influences how you exist, right?
This is only telling you
So
the nature part, though, and not the nurture part, yeah? If you look at your
yeah, so
genome?
you could
Yeah.
have a gene, right, that says you're way more likely to become addicted to things, whether it be gambling or extreme sport or something like that, right? But if you are never put in a situation where you are likely to engage in that behavior, right? You may not ever know that, right? It may, just because it's in your genetics doesn't necessarily mean it happens, right?
So
Just like
generally, we may be sort of bad at understanding how to apply this information as humans. And if you get a bunch of
uh
information and don't know what to do with it, it's not necessarily actually that useful.
it can be very scary. And I think if you don't, unless you understand what you're looking at, essentially being given a risk, like a high risk factors for your existence, is probably just going to make you miserable. Um, because I mean, like, yeah, it's a good point. What Phoenix says is like it's your DNA versus what's actually expressed. Like, you have a big list of DNA, right? And not everything is expressed. We have on and off switches essentially above our genes, right? And um, just because you have something, right, doesn't mean that it's currently being expressed or activated, right? Um, and there are a lot of things that are like, they sort of have like a latency period. There are some things that in your genetics won't activate till you're like 40 or something. Classic example is Huntington's disease, which is essentially it's like a repeating pattern in a certain gene, and if you have over a certain amount of repeats, it you're likely to. It's pretty much like you'll be fine. Certain amount of repeats. There's like a middle ground where it's like maybe, and then there's like confirmed you will get this, right? And that's like something you can get tested for. Um, and the thing with like genetic testing, sorry for going on such a rant, but it's like you could find that information out. You can get tested for it, right?
Yep.
But one of the most important things, like, people need counseling for this sort of information. One of the things we don't really have right now is an adequate way of, like, if you find out this sort of information, how do you handle that? What do you do with that? How does that change your life? And if it's a maybe, yeah, some people would prefer not to know. But if it's a maybe, um, you
Yeah.
find out that something might happen, it can definitely maybe not have good effects for your mental health and things like that, because
That's
um,
fascinating.
it's very important. It's something I worry about with the fact that people can now just get their you know genome sequenced. And I mean, a lot of people who get it done now, probably because it is quite expensive, will understand it. um yeah.
I know science teachers who have had to stop doing Punnett squares with, like, you are the child of your parents. Do a Punnett square to find out why your
Like
eyes are
eye
this color or
color, or
whatever.
the
And then,
chin
like,
thing.
kids find
Yeah.
out that they can't get this eye color from their parents. and,
Yeah.
and then you've
I mean,
opened
like,
a
you
whole
can.
can of worms.
I always like using the thing of like there can always be spontaneous mutation. Spontaneous mutation is always an option. It can happen.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, the blood testing one is particularly bad. But there you'll find out that there are certain features that are hereditary, and that's where it gets dangerous with kids. You normally don't get them to test themselves because it's a bad idea. For example, if you go, well, we're both. I mean, like, there are certain cases where things can happen, but for, like, if you have two blue-eyed parents and you have brown eyes, you go, hmm, you know, um,
Oh.
what's going on here?
Yeah.
Um, but it's tread
Yeah.
lightly. It's like you want to inform, and if you are teaching them these things, they may figure it out themselves. Yeah, it is hotel gin, but you say spontaneous mutation, as in like, ooh, we're just gonna not go there, you
Say
know?
that infrastructure existed in society where you could take one of these tests or have your genome sequenced or whatever, and then they didn't actually tell you what it did or anything, but they just gave you a pill, and the pill had, there's this thing that will prevent the onset of Huntington's disease or something in the pill, and they don't like tell you that, but they are
I'd
giving
hate
you a
that.
pill, and other medical doctors can find out what's in the pill to make sure medications don't clash and stuff. You'd hate that? You
I'd
can,
rather be
let's say
informed,
you
I suppose.
can find
Yeah.
out what's in it if you want
Or like
to,
you have the
but there's an
choice.
option. There's an option to
So
not know and just take a pill every day.
so basically I go, I want to know what's wrong with me, and they go, well, you don't want to know what's wrong with you, but we'll test it. We'll give you a pill that fixes everything that's wrong with you, and you won't ever have to think about it.
Yeah, that seems pretty sweet to me.
Um,
I'd take a pill a day.
but do you trust them?
What
That's a lot
if
of trust,
here's
I
the
guess, is
thing.
the thing,
What if,
right?
what if you do that and then like your friends do it too, and your friends all have pills that are like this big and you have a pill that's like this big? Like it's
You're
like
like, what's wrong with me? Why are
yeah.
they going to me? What's going on? You know?
Uh-oh.
Oh god. Yeah. I guess that the problem is yeah. Oh, I wouldn't be comfortable with that personally. Um. Yeah. Look. It just because the amount of control you're handing over to someone else, right?
Sure.
To
There would
make sure
be
they're doing the
serious
right
like
thing.
ethical and legal problems with it. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
100%. Um, yeah, because like there are so many things that could go wrong there. And again, the thing with genetics is it's not even like, um, I mean, yeah, pockets. Like taking a prescription of anything is trust in science, but you can normally go, well, I have this sickness, and then you can look up the pill you're taking and go, okay, well, they've prescribed me this. What does this do? What is the research behind it? It's not like a masked pill that we don't look at and we don't know what it does, and they just go take this and hopefully it'll magically work, right? Like you can be a bit more informed with your opinion currently, right? Um, yeah, I don't want to be in a situation where they're like where someone else dictates everything that happens for my health and I don't have a say in it, right?
Sure.
Because like what if they're treating something that they see as bad but you don't?
It can definitely be an issue.
Yeah. Like I don't know, say like you double jointed hands or something. I don't know. And they're like, "Well, we'll fix that." And it's like, but you know, if you don't mind it and you're fine with it, and you get to do, I don't know, you do fun tricks with your hands or whatever, and it's not deleterious, so it's not hurting you. You know, like it gets into a big like that sort of conversation can always spiral because there's a hypothetical of what if, and then also how much do you trust someone else with all of your life choices essentially,
Sure.
you know.
I think
Oh
it's
shit.
fascinating. I think that's totally
Yeah.
crazy. We just sort of don't have infrastructure for this knowledge yet as a society, almost.
Yeah.
And
100%.
maybe we will by the time I'm like old enough to really benefit from it, which is sort of a cool idea. Maybe 20 years
Yeah.
from now, people will be like, hey, you're starting to get up there, but we have a free test that's paid for with your taxes where you can find out if you're gonna
Hmm.
have a particular genetic disease or not. And if we find
Yeah.
out you are, we can give you some treatment for it. It'd be sort of cool.
Hmm. Because I know people want to. Do we want to do COVID? Like I have articles which I can always link people to look at, but they're more
Oh,
just
yeah, I
good
want to
and bad
look at articles
examples.
for sure. Let's see some good and
All
bad
right.
examples.
Which one do we want to look at? I have a Mike, do you want a bad one? Do you want a good one? Let's take a look at. I have like a few examples, so let's see. Oh, this one's interesting. This kind of looks at the uh, it's an interesting graph to look at. It's not necessarily the best article, but it looks at the public. This was called Public Assessment of GMO Danger to Environment. It has a little graph of sort of
All right, so this
how
is going
people
back to
feel.
food.
Yeah, so this is a GMO example.
Okay.
Sorry, I just got up a bit. And obviously you'd want to have the same critical eye, I guess, that we'd think before. So title, who wrote it, tone of language, when was it produced, and your annex. I have honors, so I did a year of study um, on top of my Bachelor
Anastasia
of Science.
Bodnar.
Yeah.
Do you trust their like thing on the website? Policy Director
Um,
of Biology Fortified Inc. Science
this is better than
communicator
the last one,
and
but I would
multidisciplinary
still.
risk analyst.
Hmm,
PhD in plant genetics. She's more impressive than you are, Kate.
that's okay. That's
I
okay. Yeah.
if we're not
I couldn't
trusting
answer
her,
science
it casts doubt on the entire broadcast.
though. Yeah. Oh no. Again, like all of these are ones that you Google and look up, so I don't sort of take them with a grain of salt.
Sure.
Like even this, I'm like, this is talking about people being scared of GMOs and public opinion,
Okay.
and the change in public opinion, and like you don't have to read the entire thing, but
Fear
it
of
sort of talks about
GMOs is increasing.
yeah.
Extremely dangerous. 40%? Is this in the where is this? What country is this? The US?
Yeah. Yes, Emily, bachelor degree in science. So
40% say extremely or very dangerous. What's the question that they
see,
got asked?
yeah, well that's the thing you have to consider, right? Is when you see that sort of information, you go, what's the sample size? Does it say in the caption? I think it does.
It's like
Obviously you have to go look at the
1,276 or something. It's over 1,000,
yeah,
so that's a large enough sample size. If they're asking a good
better than 10.
question, but what is the
Yes.
question? I did statistics, so this is in my wheelhouse. If the question's like, would it be possible to make something dangerous with GMOs, and how dangerous would the most dangerous thing you could make be, then
And you'd
like
be like,
everyone would be
extremely
like,
dangerous.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
100% of people answer that question that way. So like it does depend what the question actually is that was asked.
Chad is currently debating the terminology I used, and look, it's a Bachelor of Science. If I wrote it wrong, I'm sorry. Okay, forgive me. All right, it's less of the argument currently. But yeah, this is basically, it's slightly more trustworthy, if only because you go, okay, well, the person writing it has some sort of background, right? Oh yeah, the abbreviations are different in different countries, obviously. Yeah, so like, why are people scared? I like it more because again, it shows graphs, but when it shows graphs, it gives more information. It's more to the fact rather than, oh my god, this is how you need to feel about this thing. Like, it's more concise. Like, it's still going to have a clickbaity title, right? It's probably almost always going to have that because you want someone to click on your article, right? Like that's it's always something to keep in mind of, like, at least they're not saying, oh my god, everyone's scared of GMOs and this is why. Like, it's phrased slightly better.
This paragraph's really interesting. If you ask people what are the top things they are concerned about when it comes to food, GMOs hardly make the list. People care much more about quality and cost. Only 7% said that they wanted GMO labeling on foods if we were going to add something extra to food labels. And yet you go back to the thing up here and it says like 40% think GMOs are extremely dangerous. It doesn't make any sense.
I feel like that's like, if you ask someone out of context, if you ask them a direct question and go, are you scared of GMOs? They're going to go say yes or no.
But then
right?
in day-to-day life,
if you just
maybe
if you're
they
just
don't think
asking
about it at all. Yeah.
It's in different situations. Like, if you don't bring it up, you know, yeah, I think, yeah, danger to the environment too. That's not to people. That's another thing to keep in mind for that.
Oh yeah, it does say modifying
you for
genes
pointing
of
that out,
crops
Sandy.
to the environment, which is a very different thing. Um, It always tilts me when articles like this say stuff like women were more fearful than men. Like, what am I meant to do with that sentence? You could have just left that out.
Yeah.
I would have enjoyed my
Yeah.
life more if you just left that sentence out.
Mm. But someone goes, "Oh, well, this is a statistic we can put in there." You
Yeah,
know?
it's like, well, a lot of our readers are sexist and they'll want to know how to inform their sexist beliefs better, so we'd better
Mm.
add this to the article. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Um,
Wonderful.
yeah, and it's like a lot of these articles, like if you don't read the original source, it's always an interpretation of like their interpretation of the information, right? Um, and yeah, like I mean, like I've got heaps for like other things, but it's like a lot of these are kind of the same because you're trying, like again, like I mentioned at the start, but if um you're trying to convey complicated information that's not easy to explain, but you want people to still be interested. Um, and sometimes it's, yeah, one article is never sufficient in learning about a topic. But the problem is, right, the problem we have as humans and everything else is that we very much tend to, like, this is a trend, like I've noticed, is like you see the first thing about a particular topic and you tend to make up your opinion and then you like when you've made up your own opinion you sort of cling to that and then you have to be convinced out of that, right? And it
And
can
it's
be quite
hard.
difficult to do
Yeah,
that
it's hard to convince
because
someone out of
yeah,
an opinion for sure. People
yeah,
like to double down. People like to find articles that back up the thing they already think.
yeah,
People feel personally attacked when you tell them they're wrong. If you do show them that their opinion's wrong, they like lose all of the time they spent building it and then they have nothing.
yeah.
So you have to like re-educate. You can't just
And
tell them no.
you can most definitely cherry pick pretty much at this point on the internet that you will be able to find enough things for any argument, right? 100%. Like you would be able to you may look at it and you go, okay, well this is from 10 years ago, but it'll be like, well this supports my argument. And you can definitely pretty much for anything at this point find things that will suit an argument that you want to push, or at least you can find enough things that you can link together um, to feel like, at least in yourself, that you've supported the argument enough, right? Um, and it's hard. I mean, like that's like the main thing, right? It's hard. How do you um how do we get around that? You know, do we force more people into science communication to try and communicate things better? Will that necessarily work? No.
I don't know how
You know,
you motivate people to do things. The only political movement I've ever been involved in was a movement to actually get GMOs labeled. And I'm not anti GMOs, but the reason I got excited about it was that some of the rhetoric in the movement was like, we want to improve food labeling for consumers. Food labeling is pretty bad in the US.
yeah.
And there's a huge public sentiment about GMOs. We're going to use that to build a popular movement to get legislation passed that requires better labeling of food. So it's like
Mm.
this two-step manipulative process. It's very like Machiavellian. It's very like sneaky. I didn't get super into the movement or anything, but I like went to a town hall in LA and I don't it was so bizarre. There are these like hyper logical people who are like, well, this is public opinion and this is what we want to do with the science and we need to make this policy change and we're going to use strategy A, B, and C to do that. And then there are a bunch of people who are like there yelling about frankenfoods. And
Um, so what did they actually end up changing? Like, was it just the
it
fact that
didn't
they've
end up
added like
passing.
GMO to the label? Oh, okay.
No, that one
But
didn't
it
end
was
up
a
passing.
discussion about changing it.
Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, like, because it is important because we want to educate people, right? We want to make it easier. Um, yeah, like food labels is very difficult. The problem is, art, like, and the people in chat, like, as someone who studied science, we barely touched on this. As I said, like, we had, yeah, 2 half-an-hour classes, which were like, hey, take this article, make it understandable by the general public. I do believe, especially, I think it's in the UK, you can just study science communication, but it's not. attractive. Like it's not like people go, I want to be a science communicator from the bat. Normally it's like you study science, you'll see the fact that we have such a terrible way of like expressing our information because we go from needing a lot of background information to trying to explain it to people without any. Um, but there's not roles for science communication. People don't hire people for science communication. A lot of the people who do science communication are they've finished their uni, done whatever, gone, I need to make a difference. I'm going to go give talks about it. I'm going to be self-motivated, right? Um, and that's what a lot of them are. And then you have independent people who, again, other people who are referenced for, that write these sorts of articles. And while they're not all amazing, don't get me wrong, but it's not like when you study science, or at least from my personal experience, they don't go, you're, this is a career option or anything. They're just like, you need to be good at communicating. Like, that's all you get
Yeah.
told essentially.
It's sort of, sometimes it can be jarring if you believe that you live in like a representative government where things are done based on evidence and stuff like that, to see that none of the scientists are being taught how to communicate science to the general public.
Yeah.
Like, how could a
We know how to
democracy
talk
where that
science to
doesn't
other
happen
sciences.
possibly be the thing that you want it to be, it seems like something's a little bit wrong here.
Hmm. Do we want to look at good old COVID
Yes,
coronavirus?
very much
I feel
so.
it's like how long we've been going for. All right, this
We
is probably
said
the one
that
that you
we'd
guys are.
go for like 2 hours, right? So we're
Yeah,
on track-ish.
yeah, we're not doing too badly actually. Unoften STEM students are worse at people? Like, not necessarily. I mean, like you could say that for any industry. The problem I see is that we don't get taught how to do it, and that's really something we do need to be taught how to do because it's difficult. It's not something that comes naturally, right?
It should go the other way
Um,
too, right? You should get taught how to read about science in schools, and I didn't
um,
get taught
I
that
like
all that
in yeah,
much.
like high school level, that would be good.
Yeah. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I think the first time I really got into like academic journals was in college. I don't think I ever had a project where a teacher like had us do that in high school.
Because yeah, learning, uh, we learned in uni how to like look at other people's studies and identify like a bad or a good study, right? Like look at statistics, look at their conclusions, look at what they're saying, like yeah, science literature. Like we learned that, but it was not look at what the media says and pick apart their argument. It was other scientific papers, right?
Sure. And so much of the interaction with science and the media is like recreational. It's not informative.
Mm,
I'm not sitting down
yeah.
thinking I need to learn about the coronavirus when I click on that article. I'm thinking
Mm.
I don't have anything to do right now. I want to spend some time. Oh, this looks terrifying. Let's find out what that is. Feed my
Yeah, you're more
anxiety a little
likely to
bit.
click it because someone's gone, oh my god, this thing is happening in the news, right? And you're like, oh, what's that?
Yeah,
So in talking about
it's like a different
coronavirus,
mode.
yeah. So step one, coronavirus is a family of viruses. It is
Yes,
not just one
this is
virus.
COVID
That's
19.
the first thing that got misreported. So coronavirus is the family. So if we see other coronaviruses pop up in the future, you'll know that no, it's not the same one, most likely, right? So COVID-19 or coronavirus disease 19 is the strain, right? So it has similar symptoms to the flu, fever, tiredness, dry cough, aches, pains, nasal congestion, similar flu sort of symptoms. Most people will be fine if they get it. Obviously, if you're immunocompromised, have underlying medical issues, really young or really old, or you already have a cold, you're going to be more susceptible to it than others. Sorry, novel coronavirus. Um, it's a virus, so and then this specific kind, it's transmittable by respiratory droplet, right? So if you're sick, you want to stay away.
Respiratory droplet.
Yeah, so think about like droplets that are. So if you cough, you put a bunch of like
Sure.
water droplets.
So does it
If you
attach
sneeze,
to water then?
yeah, it's a way to
It's
put it, I suppose. Yeah,
okay.
it's it survives in like a droplet form. It's not like in the air; it's in droplets. That's probably not the best way of explaining it. Antibiotics won't do anything to cure the virus because antibiotics are for bacteria
And
typically,
this is viral.
and this
Yeah.
is a viral
And antibiotic
viral
hand
infection.
soap won't do anything special.
Yeah.
Just regular soap works.
Um, Hand sanitizer, not bad. Washing your hands, real good. Both of those, A plus, right? Yeah, bodily fluid, touches mucous membrane. There you go. That's what we have chat for. Um, but yeah, so if you want to stop the spread of infection, like do the things that you would normally do when sick. So you sort of self isolate yourself. You want to stay clean, drink lots of water. So the same routine if you had the flu, right? Like it's a similar thing. If you think that you're at risk of getting it because either you're in an area where there's an outbreak, right? Or you're traveling to like heavily populated areas where lots of people are traveling. Um, you know, like obviously you don't want to make alarmist comments and be like, oh my God, if you're sneezing, go to hospital, right? But one of the main things is like try not to touch your face, try and stay clean, wash your hands regularly. Again, yeah, doing the proper hand washing protocol. If you want to look it up, you need to make sure it's not just like this. It's like you need to make sure that you get like, sorry, I realize you can't even see my hands, but like wash your hands properly and thoroughly. Hand
It's
sanitizer is
really
great.
fun to wash your hands properly. I found a video online that was like, this is how you do it. And then I'll just like go and wash my hands for a minute or two. It's very like, it's very self-care. It's very calming.
Yeah. It feels a bit ridiculous, but I feel like the more we emphasize it, the better. You know, because one of the best things is that, I mean, like you touch stuff with your hands, and if you touch things with your hands that someone could have coughed or sneezed on, and then you touch your face, you know, like you're putting yourself at a higher risk. So just like try not to touch your face, try to wash your hands regularly, like all of those sorts of things, right? Those are
Sure.
sort of the most basic things you can do. If you are feeling very sick, get help, right? Go to the hospital, do what you need to do. At least in Australia, they've now set up local hotlines. So if you are concerned about coronavirus, COVID-19, it's going to be hard to distinguish that
Do
at
you
this
know
point
the
because
symptoms off
all
the
of
top
them
of
are
your
being.
head? I know
I mean, it's, yeah, so
fever,
fever, tiredness,
sneezing,
dry cough.
tiredness, dry cough.
It's basically flu
Oh, is it
symptoms, but
cough
for
rather than
this
sneezing?
uh nasal congestion and dry cough, yeah. But one of the things is like if you are sick enough to need hospital care, right? Yeah, shortness of breath, it has like a pneumonia effect. um it's like if it's bad enough, just don't take risks at the moment, right? Don't be like, oh, it'll be fine, it'll blow over, right? Like if you are in a high risk area, be aware, get the help that you need, right? Self isolate if needed, get tested, do whatever you have to do. If you find, like, if you get tested, you find out it's just the flu, that's great news, right? Like, there's no harm in that. That's awesome. You find out you're just gonna get the flu. You know, like most
Oh,
healthy
getting
adults,
your
if you
flu
don't,
shot is a great idea.
yes.
If
So a
yeah.
lot of people are like, do we have a vaccine for this? I guess one of the things to keep in mind is we don't have it yet. I think they're in the process of trying to make one, but at the same time, it won't necessarily protect you against it because with the amount of time it takes, and then you have to take time to. When you get a vaccine, it takes time to produce the antibodies and seroconvert. Um, oh, 100% sanity. Take mortality rate with a grain of salt. That's a really good thing to mention. It's from memory, the mortality rate, they're comparing it to SARS, which was also a coronavirus. SARS is significantly more deadly but less infectious. Um, this is more infectious but less deadly. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is that we don't have the full picture yet, and it's going to take a lot of time before we understand it. Like, this takes time to understand and to process statistics because the people currently getting tested are the sickest, right? So
Mhm.
we have a skewed picture, right? Because um, the worst people who are the sickest are getting tested, and if you're not really that sick, you're not getting tested. So if you may get it and you may not be that sick, right? But um, you know, you're going to have the issue with the fact that all of your data is from the people who are really sick. So we've got to wait way more time until we have way more resources to look at things to have more of an accurate picture, if that makes sense. Because essentially we're only looking at half of it, you know? Um,
Sure.
because we sort of have to prioritize resources to look at
And a
who's
lot of the time,
doing the worst stuff.
in the most alarmist takes, the thing that's getting pointed to is that you have an incubation period where you don't have symptoms and you can be getting other
Yeah,
people sick that's quite long. And so
yeah,
quite it spreads to more than one person per person who gets it on average, which means that if you believe that that's going to
yeah.
keep going forever, it means everybody's going to get sick. But obviously, at some point,
Yeah,
lots of
I mean,
people have
like
gotten it, so that goes down.
we're trying to do our best. Oh, it's really hard with respiratory droplet, like mucus membrane colds, obviously, because it's, you breathe. That's an issue. You breathe out at someone, you can get someone else sick.
Right.
Um, it's quite difficult, and this is something that is spreading quickly. Like as you can see, the panic that it induces is obviously not helpful to people because people are panicking, and then people are getting quarantined who shouldn't get quarantined, and then people who should be quarantined aren't getting quarantined, and
And people are breaking
um
out of quarantines to go to
yeah.
public events.
And it's quite difficult because yeah, like the healthcare workers, like if you work in healthcare right now, you are probably overworked, and you're trying really hard because you don't want this to go and spiral out, right? Because obviously, like everyone's working really hard to try and contain it or to try and come up with something to help, or to stop the spread, right? And it's hard because everyone's working really hard, and then if your workers get sick because they're frontline essentially, right, then who do you have to help? And one of the things is that a lot of people have been buying masks, right, because masks of any kind are meant to be, you think of it like it's a physical barrier, right? Whether or not you buy the right mask is a whole nother question.
Sure.
um and one of the things that's happening locally is, so China, at least to Australia, is not um, supplying masks to us anymore. And because of the public panic, a lot of people are buying masks, especially in Australia, where we don't necessarily need it in a lot of our areas. Obviously, it's helpful, but we don't need to be panic buying masses, right? A lot of healthcare is running out of masks. For example, my friend's a dentist, and she's like, "Well, I won't be able to practice soon because we don't have masks, and our regulatory body won't approve us to use like a face shield and a fabric mask. So I won't be able to practice dentistry, right?
It's
Um,
pretty
and then that's just like
not
one
great.
one corner, right?
Yeah.
And that's just going to get worse, right? Yeah, the toilet paper panic in Australia is a bit
Is there
ridiculous.
concern with this if I have like a crate of face masks and I'm going to ship it from China to Australia? Is there concern that the disease could be attached to those face masks in some way, or is it not that sort of transfer?
As in public concern, yes. People are scared of any, like, at least for Australia, people are basically like, if it's made in China, I'm scared of it
Okay.
because
What about
I
in terms of
there
like
is a
actual
strong
scientific
association.
evidence?
In terms of it like being able to survive that long on an inanimate object that's not like a mucous membrane or something is unlikely, right?
Only survives on
Um,
surfaces for 7 hours. Is that like its
but
half life, or is that
uh,
what does
it
seven
would be
hours
something like
mean?
that probably. Yeah, but by the time you got from there, like it wouldn't be an issue. There is not an actual toilet paper shortage in Australia. We make most of our toilet paper in South Australia, for context, if you've seen any of it on the news. Essentially, people were told, hey, if you have to self isolate and stay at home for a while, um, get the essentials. And the Australians went,
Toilet
well,
paper?
toilet paper, rice, and eggs. Eggs perishable, by the way, so I don't really understand that one, but and then you get the secondary wave of people who go, they're panic buying, and if they panic buy everything, I need to panic buy everything or there'll be nothing left for me. And so then you have a second wave of people going, shit, I need to buy toilet paper and rice and pasta and eggs, right, and hand sanitizer as well. um and that's one of the things, is like our media are just continuously publishing more and more and more about it.
Well, it's
And so you
selling
keep
really
seeing it
well
in the
too,
news, and
yeah.
every time you look at your phone, it's like toilet paper panic, toilet paper crisis,
Yep.
and it's, you like, we don't need that right now. Like,
Something that I haven't
yeah.
seen yet that I would love would be what can I change about my behavior to stop myself from spreading this? I've read
Mm,
about, like, what do I do to stop myself from getting it? But if I
mm.
did have it, like, should I not be going out at all just in
I mean,
case
if you
I
could
have
avoid it,
it?
like
Like,
if you know you have it, the
if I
biggest
don't know
thing
I
is just
have
like
it is the
staying away.
thing.
If you
Are there
don't, yes,
really, because washing my hands is so easy. It's like it doesn't really
it's
cost me much
easy,
at
but a
all
lot
to
of
wash
people
my
don't do it.
hands, but they should.
A lot of people
And
don't
I
do it.
appreciate the communication that's like wash your hands, because then I can be like, okay, this
Mm,
is one of the important things to do to not get it, so
mm.
I'm going to prioritize that, you know?
So
So I
it's
would love communication that was like, hey, if you're
mm,
having a conversation with someone, stand further away than usual. Like if someone
yeah. I mean, I
communicated that
have
to me, I'd do it.
a
But I
where
haven't
am I
read
to?
anything like that yet.
Let me know. Can you open? Oh, page. Wait, they've deleted it. Oh my god. Oh, I had this article up. Okay, okay, never mind.
Was
Never
it
mind to that
bad
one.
or
Oh,
good?
no, no, no. It was a really, really good article. It's on something called Medscape, which is I don't know. I don't think it's Australian, but it basically had information for nurses and healthcare workers on what they could do. But it's deleted. Okay, maybe they changed their mind. I don't know. Um, as much as I know a lot of people don't like the World Health Organization, might have retitled it maybe. Um, they do have a good article, which is basically things you can do, advice for public, which is going to be the same thing that we've talked about, which is wash your hands, keep distant from people, just sneeze into your elbow. If you have fever, cough, difficulty breathing, seek medical
Ooh, they have
care
videos too.
early. Yeah, like it has some good guidelines. I won't always agree with everything they do, but this particularly is
Oh,
decent.
this is, I mean,
Um,
this is
it even has
basically
nice
what I was
diagrams.
looking for, yeah.
Yeah,
Maintain
exactly.
social
So
distancing. Why? Oh, it
yeah,
even tells me why.
they also have a page about scams because there's been a lot of an issue with that.
Seek medical care
Phoenix,
early.
because we touch everything. Our hands touch everything. We touch doors. We touch our face. It's the main thing we have to for like contact of things, if that makes sense.
You
Like
should
we
also
do
not
everything with our
lick
hands.
things like doors
Yeah.
and walls right now, but they just sort of assume that you weren't doing that already. But if you are the
Yeah.
sort of person who does that, um, keep an eye on that one. Stay informed and follow advice given by your healthcare provider. That's
Yeah,
so
because obviously
vague.
it's vague because it's different where you live. Because the same
Yeah,
advice I would give someone in Australia is obviously very different to what I would give you in America, right? Um, that's probably them going, well, we can't actually say anything that will be generally applicable, right? Um, and I have a very entertaining article about COVID, but
I want to see this entertaining one. Is this bad? Bad
oh,
entertaining?
it's bad.
Okay.
The fun ones are the bad ones, unfortunately. I can explain it quite quickly though. Basically, applying the good scientific knowledge that I gave you guys before. I'll link it to you. This is called "Vitamin C Protects Against Coronavirus," right? And it's an article saying if you have high doses of vitamin C, it will cure you of coronavirus, right? Um, which I'm going to tell you now is no. All right, no. And so if you look at this, you might go, this kind of looks scientific, right?
It does look
This
very
kind of looks like a
scientific.
scientific article, right? And then you look at it and you go, orthomolecular org. Wait, what is this journal? And they're a self-titled. So orthomolecular medicine is a form of alternative medicine, and that immediately goes, okay, well, if it's alternative medicine, it's
It's such a,
not
it's a
medicine.
very awkward word, yeah. So not medicine,
And then
yeah.
you go, well, who is Andrew Saul? Who is this guy who's written this article and he's credited himself for it? And it turns out he is a self-proclaimed mega vitamin man, and he sells vitamin C. And you sort of think and you go, why would someone who sells vitamins then make an article saying vitamins essentially will cure this virus? I wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's some conflict of interest going on, right? Um, and then if you look at the context of this, it's a bit ridiculous. But
Oh
this
my
is the sort of,
gosh,
and
the
then people will then
references
reference this.
though. Look at
Yeah.
Look at how many articles he's. Oh, they're all
But it
him.
looks
Every
scientific.
single one of them is his website.
I mean, yeah, some of them are.
Yeah, maybe
But
not every
it's
single
just,
one.
it's, yeah. So like, so there are lots of articles like this, and it
He
is what I
has
would
an
call a scam.
editorial review board with like 50 people on it. Did they all
Yeah, the
sign off on
reference
this?
format is a big sign. If any of you done scientific writing, you do not normally sort your references by type of vitamin for context.
Comments and
But the
media
thing is,
contact Dr. Saul at dryourself.com. That sounds
yeah.
like Saul Goodman from
Um,
Better Call Saul. Like this is what
the
the person who
thing,
isn't a doctor calls themselves.
yeah, no, 100%. But the thing to keep in mind is like, the problem is that this article is then referenced for something on like a Facebook article, right? And he goes, and
Sure.
to the uneducated eye, right? The problem is that it looks scientific. Like you look at that and you go, it looks scientific, right? It doesn't mean it is. This was written on like the 20th of January or something, right? Gareth, I think, if I look at it. You know, and the problem is that to an untrained eye, you might look at that and go, that looks scientific enough for me to believe it. But the second you start clicking on things, you go, okay, this is falling apart. This is pseudoscience. This is not an actual thing. And if you take a look into vitamins, and while vitamins can be useful if you're vitamin deficient, they are not magical. They do not cure things unless you have scurvy. You know, like,
Sure.
uh,
The
yeah,
idea that vitamin C is good for you is something that a lot of people are very sympathetic toward and like is true a lot of
and
the
it's
time.
believable.
But it's
That's
just
the problem.
not a cure for coronavirus.
Hmm. Yeah, but
It's a
the
good
thing is
sales
that you see
technique
that
though.
he's selling
Yeah.
it. He's selling
Yeah,
multivitamins.
absolutely.
So it's very much like a biased example, right? Um, would you want to look at
Don't you
another
simply
one?
metabolize excess vitamin C? That's my understanding of
You
it.
kind of just pee it out, yeah.
Yeah,
You just get rid of it.
which is
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it just in a
so
different context, vitamins can be very useful.
and if
But
you're in a situation where vitamin C is actually helpful for you for some medical reason, you can just like have as much of it as you want pretty much and you're just gonna
depends on the vitamin. Some you won't
No,
mind.
I've started selling vitamin C tablets, Jorbs brand, and I can assure you that 500 of these a day.
Yeah, but you only get 100 in a bottle, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh god. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I
They're
I felt like
actually
this
they're
one was one
free
of the funnier
though.
ones.
They're free though, but it's $15 shipping.
Oh, okay, I see. Yes, fat, but yeah. So I wouldn't say all vitamins you can just take. I definitely would not recommend that. One weird trick to absorb additional vitamin C. One of the I don't have the article for it, but I remember reading. I think it was in the UK. They were selling it's some sort of vitamin C drink sachet thing that just has like an excessive amount. It's not like bad for you, but it's excessive, right? And it was like there's a certain degree where like the placebo effect comes in,
Right,
right?
of
Where
course.
you're like you believe this thing will work, and hence even if it doesn't, as long as it's not causing harm, um, you know, at what point is that okay, right? You know, and to be honest, the power of positive thinking and believing yourself well or believing yourself sick is quite, I guess, like an important thing to consider. I guess you can definitely think yourself sorry, sick, um, or think yourself well in terms of like you can't like magically cure things, but you can certainly make yourself feel better, right?
Sure.
Or feel worse, because the mind is, yeah, stress is a big like a big factor as well. Um, but like your brain is a very powerful thing in terms of if you will feel better
If
or
stress
worse,
is
you
a
know.
huge factor for getting
Yeah.
sick, could I write an article that was like reading media articles that exaggerate negative things will give you coronavirus? I could like publish
um,
that study. It's the perfect intersection of emotionally charged and scientific.
hmm. I mean, maybe on the IFL science thing, you might be able to publish.
Wonderful. I'll get in touch with
Yeah,
Andrew.
yeah, sweet.
Vitamin C is known to reduce stress levels. Uh, Wonderful. All right, do you want to open up for some questions?
Yeah, let's do questions. I'll move you guys over to my main screen and make that a bit easier.
Any questions about science communication and how to get good information about scientific things?
The thing I did find the hardest, and I will make note, is there was no clear like source I could give you that I could be like 100% of the time this is giving you good information, which is why I haven't given
That's
you a
sort
link
of
for that
crazy.
because
Not
as much as I
even
would,
like a UN health source or something like that.
well, it's like they can be okay, but then it's like sometimes they aren't, or sometimes they're too slow to update about articles or whatever. How would you? What's POJ?
What is
I
what
don't
is
know what that.
Podge?
What? Oh, like the oh. Oh, okay. I was like, what? Does that stand for something? I don't know. God damn it. Chat, please, you're memeing me. How do we learn to tell good science from bad science? Because the article about vitamin C, I can't tell the difference. Oh, that's why I gave you the list of things.
Yes,
So
we
there's
had
the
a
things
list
to
of
keep in mind.
5.
It's basically what is the title, who is writing it, go see like you do like a 2-second investigation. Who are they, why are they writing about this, find out a little bit more about them, right? The emotion, is there an emotional tone to the article, is it fact, right? When was it published, because it could obviously time passes, things change, things we say today could be invalidated in like a month from now, right? That's quite possibly like a thing that can happen, right? Because we may find different scientific information that changes the things that we knew in the past, and then you have to have like an updated opinion, right? And then yeah, where is it published? Do you trust it? Do you think it's a good source of information? Do you think it's a bad source of information? You know, where are you looking for this? Is it somewhere you trust? What is your recommendation on being informed on a larger set of topics? It takes energy to process validity. Is that a skill that improves? You definitely get better at it. And I mean, like I say that after I've gone through, many years of university. So when you go through university, it's like you sort of over time, like even if you're not paying attention, you get information from everyone around you that's usually more educated or like at a higher level, and you do get better at processing it, because like this, it takes emotional energy and time, right, to invest time into looking these things up, right? um and you don't necessarily have that time. So I guess like my main advice is what's important to you, right? You can't do everything. You just can't. That's not something you're capable of. You can't do everything. So the main thing I would recommend is what's important to you, right? And then from there, where can you choose to, like, where you want to make a difference, where you care. So for example, say you're interested in fashion and you go, well, I want to be better for the environment because that's like my background, right? Like I want to do something better, I want to be better informed. So you go, well, I'll look up more about like fast fashion, I'll avoid fast fashion because fast fashion goes to landfill, and I'll make my effort in that area. Or maybe you don't care about fashion, you'll buy a $10 t-shirt and you don't give a crap, but then you'll just go through and you'll go, okay, well, but I care about composting, so I want to be better with food waste. Or I just want to make sure I bring my bag to the supermarket so I don't have to get a paper bag, like those sorts of things. Um,
I really like
you
asking
know,
other people who care about something instead of having to
hmm,
care about it myself. For example, having you on the stream to talk about science communication instead of
yeah.
me actually having to learn about it.
Yeah, I mean, like I still had to do a decent amount of
Yes.
background because it's just like, it's not something that's taught well. As a future scientific communicator, what steps can I take to become better at communicating with those outside my field? Practice. All right. So I guess the best thing is, I guess, what we did in uni, which is take an article, take something you're interested in, because that's always the best thing to start, right? If you're passionate about something, you're going to be way happier to talk about it. And then find someone who doesn't understand. Maybe it's your mum, maybe it's a sibling, maybe not the old lady at the grocery store because she doesn't have time to listen, but find someone who will sit down and have a conversation and see if that you can get them to understand or at least be on the same page. Because I guess one of the things to always keep in mind is not everyone cares, right, about whatever you're talking about. But if you can at least inform them and feel like you've informed them in a way where they might take something away from it, they might not, like, because you can't force people to care about what you care about. But usually if someone else is passionate about something, you get a little bit invested, because if it's someone you care about them and they care about this thing, so you're way more likely to be convinced, right? Or at least consider it. But the main thing is practice. Because when you ask someone, for example, like I tried to tell someone about, I found a lot of interest in a thing called progeria, which is basically a mutation, right? And if you have the condition progeria, there's a mistake in the gene progerin where there's basically a gene is this long, right? Or like say the gene's this long, and that's what it normally gets made at. There's like a different version which is shorter, essentially. But if you have this mutation, you only make the short version, right? And basically these kids age like 13 times as fast, um, and it's a really, really interesting condition. And obviously, when I was studying genetics, I did a whole paper on it because I'm like trying to get people to understand it a bit better. Because like the things we can learn from that is like if you age 13 times as fast, what are we learning about aging from this? Like it can be very interesting. But getting people to care about my rants about that was quite difficult. And they're like, okay, well, you're talking about this gene thing, but like I don't even understand what a gene is. You're saying the protein attaches to the cell nucleus, but what's a nucleus? What's a cell? I just don't understand. And so then that's when you're like, okay, well, so to understand this, I need to explain this step. And then, okay, so to understand that, what do I then need to go? Like, how many levels do you have to unpack? And how do you then convey that in a way that's easy to understand? And that's the hard part, unfortunately.
Sure. So if somebody is into pseudoscience and
Oh,
you're
yeah,
close
fun.
to them, how what's the talk? What's the formula to explain to them that
So
vitamin C from Dr. Saul is not going to prevent coronavirus?
it's not easy, right? Like, and it's never going to be easy because, again, you're going to have the thing where they're like, I think this is right. And so I'm going to go buy buckets of vitamin C. Um, so I guess the thing is have valid information. Because if you want to convince someone, right, you're going to have to go like an extra mile to convince them because they've made their choice in their brain, right? So have your background information. Don't necessarily send it to them. Don't just like give them an article and be like, you're wrong, I'm right. Here's an article why I'm right, because then they can probably find an article that says they're right,
Yes.
you know? And if you're like, I would probably only do something because I am genuinely concerned about their behavior. Like, honestly, if it's not something that's going to affect me or other people,
Right.
it's probably not worth the argument because you're just going to make your friend hate you. But if you think this may hurt you or someone else, so I feel like I'm going to tell you as a good friend because I care about you, like that's the stance you have to take. It's not you're an idiot because I'm right and you're wrong. It's I care about you. I think you've been misinformed. I just wanted to give you a little bit more information that I think will help you. And it may be slow. It may be like slow steps, right? You may be like, I totally understand that you're really concerned about this. You don't want to get sick. So you're doing whatever you can to stay well, right? Because that's probably their mindset. They're like, I'm just trying to stay well. I read a thing that says vitamin C will cure everything. So I'm going to get vitamin C. And so maybe you're like, okay, we'll try, um, I don't think maybe that's the best approach. Or maybe you're like, depends how well you know the person, but maybe offer things that you know will help. Maybe don't tell them not to do it unless it's harmful, in which I would probably say, you know. But you need to like the worst thing is like A, telling someone they're wrong, and B, if someone's scared about something, not giving them another way to deal with it, right? Because if they've got nowhere else to go, you might tell them they're wrong, right? But they don't really care because they think they're doing something that'll help them. And if you haven't given them anything else to do, like you said, don't do this, and then they're like, what do I do now? You're telling me I can't take vitamin C, so like, what can I do? Is a good place to go. And a lot of the time, you might not be the best person to have this conversation with them, right? even if you're someone close, maybe you're good friends, one of the things to keep in mind is that, for example, like maybe they need to talk to a GP. Like, for example, if you don't want to get vaccines or whatever, right? You're like, you need to talk to someone who's trusted and has background information. Like you want to get to a point where they are comfortable and you need to sort of allay their, like, you need to address the fears that people have. Because that's like their strongest motivator, right? Like the strongest motivator in like most of this is I am scared of this thing, so I am doing a reactionary behavior so I can get rid of that thing. That might not be the right behavior, but I'm acting because I'm scared of this thing. So if you explain, or you get like, you may not be the right person to do it, and I think that's something that you'll just sort of have to accept in that case. Like, you cannot save everyone. It is not necessarily your job to save everyone. You can try your best, but I wouldn't, like, there's only so much you can like emotionally invest of your time to trying to fix things, right? And sometimes you just got to accept that maybe you can't convince them otherwise of that point. And this has come across a lot, like, especially if you study science, and so you have like a greater understanding than someone who hasn't studied science, just as like someone who studied something else would have more knowledge in a different area, right? It's not an easy thing to do. And you just sort of have to keep in mind that these are other people that you're talking to, and you can do your best, but in the end, they're still their own person. They'll make their own decisions, right? And you can't force that. You can try to give them the right information. It's like the whole, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right?
Yeah.
You can do your best to try and convince them, but it's not necessarily going to work just because you want it to.
Sure.
And it's a very important point.
Gosh.
Oh yes, and this is more like the excessive amounts of, take 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day and it'll magically cure things. It definitely can be useful to supplement. And I do think they are good. Like, I take vitamin D and iron like every day.
I've been thinking very hard, and despite drinking water, I'm getting a little bit of a headache. So I think I'm not allowed to go outside now because I might have coronavirus symptoms.
Oh no. Oh
Rip.
no. Do you think maybe you should
Can't
drink
go have
some more
dinner.
water and your lights off? I promise you, I don't think you've caught any viruses off the internet. At least not human viruses.
I don't know. Sometimes my antivirus on the computer sort of acts up. I'm not sure it always works. Science podcasts.
So I have a few. Let me just look at my phone. I have a few that I like. There's one that I do really like that I think does a good job explaining to layman's terms in a way that's interesting, and that is the Sawbones podcast. So it's not necessarily a medical news podcast. It's a medical history podcast, and I think it's American. But they basically go, this is what we used to do. This is what we do now. And they go over like, oh, we used to basically treat everything with alcohol. But this is now what we treat this thing with. So Sawbones I really like. I would recommend, especially like, it's just something enjoyable. It's not necessarily like the most factual thing in the world, but if you're new to science and you want to learn, they do go over like current topics. They go over very interesting things that have happened in the past. That's one I would recommend. The other one would be if you want to know more information about general science and different types of sciences. There's one called Ologies, which I'll put in chat, which basically talks to different people who have studied a very specific area of science, and it gets them to talk about their area of science. Are there any others I would recommend? There's a very fun one, which is called The End of the World with Josh Clark. That is less science and more theories about the end of the world, but it is very interesting.
Less science and more like, accurate. 2050, right?
It goes over like, different ways the world could end. So it's like antibiotic resistance and, the crisis there, or AI taking over, or climate change. And it goes over, but it's just very interesting. And sort of, if you know like one of the topics, it may open your eyes to some of the other things that you may not know about, because we tend to be very focused.
Yeah, and we
on...
talked about that with climate change, right?
Hmm.
There are it's easy to get really fixated on something that's reported as being threatening and dangerous, but there's more than one thing like that. So
yeah, it's not it's not the be all end all. It is important, but there are other factors as well, basically.
yep.
But yeah, those are probably the only ones that I've personally listened to that I would recommend. Those are good ones, I would say. I'd like to think. I don't really listen to bad scientific podcasts, so I don't really have a lot of experience there. If I've come across any, I'll let you know. But that's not normally what I'm looking for to listen to.
In your opinion.
Yes, in my opinion.
It's awesome. Thank you for coming on, Kate. I need to go have dinner, so
that's okay.
I'm
I
going
need
to go infect people with coronavirus, unfortunately.
Oh,
Rip.
hmm.
This has been a really fun conversation, though.
Yeah,
so we
thank you
talked
for chit-chatting.
about science communication in general. I will copy paste these notes to my Discord. Climate change, GMOs, CRISPR, which is for altering human DNA and other DNA, and coronavirus.
Yeah.
Thanks for the bit, Psychosynth.
Thanks for hanging, I suppose. Thanks for having me.
Yes,
And
I will hide your webcam so that
I will leave to go get my food. Goodbye.
goodbye. Alright, that was a ton of fun. Kate's awesome and very smart, so that was a cool conversation to get to have. If any of you are looking for another streamer to follow and don't follow Kate already, you can click on her name and chat to get to her channel, or !Kate will link you to her.